it's the 9th of December 2021. I'm here for Jessie James Beads on Facebook, and we're celebrating a beautiful bead mix today called Winter Solstice. It's from our Holiday 2021 collection, and it's probably my favourite bead mix of the collection. It's just my colours, it's absolutely beautiful. Lots of different things that you can do with it, but I'm going to share with you this evening, or it's this evening for me, it could be this afternoon, it could be this morning. Still not used to this multiple time zone malarkey. Anyway, welcome to the Jessie James Facebook page. It's my pleasure to be with you here. I'm Jem, I'm calling in from the United Kingdom. Just going to take you down to the board to have a little look at some of the beads that you get in this gorgeous, gorgeous blend. These dual connectors are absolutely fantastic. I would be wanting to put those on the collarbones and then add some more beads on thread in between them. Maybe with a focal coming down the centre. However you wear them, they're going to be beautiful. I also absolutely adore these stars. And this evening I'm going to be turning those into a pair of evening earrings a little bit later on for myself. I'll share photos of those at some point in the near future. But there are some absolutely glorious beads that we're going to be playing with. They are a gorgeous collection. There's lots of purples and midnight blues and AB coated. Love, love, love these coin. It's like a puffy, faceted coin bead. Anyway, welcome to the Jessie James Facebook Live for the 9th of December. I hope that you're having a beautiful, beautiful day. Now, if you have arrived, why don't you give me a quick wave to make sure that I can see that the whole thing is working, because Facebook is a tricksy little sausage and sometimes it doesn't really help me out overly much. Here we go. Teresa is in from Tampa. Trudy is in. Levita, Martin, love the neck lists you have on. Well, as a little bit of an extra, I'm going to show you the basic techniques for that one later. Hi, Anne in California. Rosanna is in. Late morning for you. And Deanne is in. Thank you for those hellos. That's absolutely wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you for joining me. I hope you're having a beautiful day, no matter what it is that you're doing. So there are a couple of different techniques that I'll be wanting to share with you today. When I take you back down to the board, we're going to look at creating a little circular focal using some of the zigzag wire that goes through the Wire Crinkler tool, which is one of these. Absolutely fabulous piece of kit, thoroughly recommended. I will also show you how to make this long drop and how to add a little bit of dimension to these very beautiful snowflakes. So with this piece, I've layered. There's a beautiful puffy coin bead at the back and then a snowflake that sits over the surface. And I think those two pieces work really beautifully together. So we're going to go through all of those techniques. And as a bonus, I'm going to show you a little bit closer the necklace that I'm wearing right now, which is all made from the fabulous Holiday 2021 Winter Solstice mix. So let's just have a quick hello and see. Hi from Arizona. Buena Park, is that California? Donna's in from Arizona. Southern California for Claudia. Colorado Springs, another from Arizona. Lakeland in Florida, good morning to you. Love the hoop with the mountains and valleys within. Never thought of putting them in a hoop. Absolutely. Inside, outside, use it to set a cab. There's so many things that you can do with them. They are fabulous. Louise is in from Canada. My lovely hello to you. I hope you're having a beautiful day. You know, I think it's cold where I am at the moment. It's about +5 degrees centigrade for today, and it's dropping down to just around freezing. I'm betting that many of you have it quite a bit colder than that. Surprise, Arizona. That is such a beautiful name for a place. Just received my zigzag tool and I'm excited to use it. That's amazing. Shelley is in. Hello, my darling. How are you? East coast of Canada. I bet you're chillier than I am today, but I'm still entitled to moan because it's what we British are best at, moaning about whatever weather it is we've been lumbered with. So you never know. Hello and welcome to all of you. So why don't we pop back down to that board and we'll have a look at some of the beads that we're going to use from this fabulous Winter Solstice collection. I get my big snowflake out of the way. I'm going to be using wires in different colours today. So in the round gold wire, I've got 18 gauge, and I'm going to use that to create the drop and the frame. I've also got a couple of short lengths of copper. Now the copper is worked in the 20 gauge. That's also round wire. And I have a little bit of the gold artistic wire in the, let's have a look, I'm sure it's 26 gauge. Yes, it is 26 gauge. So we're going to be working in a couple of different wires, but you could change up that 26 for 24 gauge if you wanted to. Now the focal in the centre of our hoop design, as Rosanna's called it, you could use any. You could use the big snowflake with the white on. You could even create a dropper with one of those fabulous, the larger size of the puffy coin beads. It's entirely up to you to change this up to fit your design aesthetic ideals. So let's have a quick look and see. Hi from Chile, South Carolina. Hi to you. Maria's in from Canada. Hello from Minnesota, Monica. 27 degrees Fahrenheit. That sounds chilly. That does sound chilly. Cynthia's waiting for her zigzag. Just ordered it yesterday. And 23 degrees in Tampa. I am all kinds of jealous, if I'm honest. Anyway, it's lovely to be with you, so why don't we take a look and get cracking. The first thing that I want to work with is creating this long drop with the hoop. Now, you don't have to have any beads in the hoop. You can quite simply go from a wrapped loop at the top, which you could put onto a thread or a piece of thonging material or ribbon, whatever you want to hang it from. Make a really nice tree ornament as well as jewellery, but I think this is quite pretty to wear as a pendant. If you didn't fancy having the long drop, we're just going to do wrapped loop to wrapped around the core wire here. So entirely up to you how you want to work that. Now I have a small segment of offcut of the wire crinkler ready to go, and I will show you how to get that ready to be used in just a second. I've also got a beautiful ring mandrel to work with to get that circular frame. Now the ring mandrel is always going to be a little bit small for certain jobs, but I'm going to show you that you can use it to create that form and shape anyway. So the first thing that we're going to do is to create the circular form and double wrap it at the bottom. So if I just pop that up to one side, I'm going to take hold of my 18 gauge. This is gold coloured round wire. I'm just going to pull that between thumb and forefinger to get that nice and smooth. Now this is quite a nice firm wire to work with, so it's super important to get that smoothness and warmth going before you start working your design. If you miss out that step, it can be just a little bit more tricky to get that to obey you, and we do want it to obey you. We want you to be happy with your design. So I'm just going to use the handle of my ring mandrel and create a basic circular form, and you can see I've got about 2.5 inches of excess over one side. I'm just going to draw the tail over the top and just pull that to one side for now. So if we just pop this down on the board, you can see that that's a little bit smaller than I actually want it to be. But because we've got that little bit of excess over the end, what we can do is just very, very gently extend that shape by hand. You can, if you want to, create more looping around the handle and then just open it out a little bit more. You get a really nice smooth roundness to work to if you do that. So when you have the size that you want, I mean, you could even just use a larger round article like a lotion lid or something similar to that. Let me just check in to see if there are any questions so far. Love the purple ring mandrel. Where did you purchase it? Well, funny you should say that. It's a Beadalon mandrel, and my friend Jessie James sent that out to me. So I'm pretty sure, although I don't have a link, I'm pretty sure that if one of our beautiful friends from Jessie James is on with us today, perhaps they could pop a link through for us. You could indeed use a pill bottle to get the size that you want. How is everybody's internet going? Mine is being a bit freezy, so hopefully yours is not being too awful for you. So sometimes I'll even have an oversized bottle of nail polish, something like that. Not that I wear it because I work with my hands and my fingernails don't tend to fare varnish very, very well. Once you've got the size that you're looking for, you've got a short tail and a long tail. And what we're going to do is imagine that we're going to take a 12 o'clock position on a clock face. We're going to turn the long tail up, and that gives us lots and lots of options for what we want to do with that later, including adding beads if we desire. So I want to make sure that that is indeed going upright, as if it was 12 o'clock on a clock face. Just going to give that a little bit of a pinch to get that straightened up. Fantastic. You have indeed received a comment there from our lovely friends at JJB for the Ring Mandrel. It's absolutely fabulous. There's also another mandrel set in other shapes. And Cynthia says mine is fine right now. That is good news indeed. It's always really difficult to judge at this end if things are going out as you want them to. So once we have that round shape with a 12 o'clock upright on the longer tail, we're going to start by wrapping this shorter tail around that 12 o'clock. Now, my shorter tail is going across the front, so I'm going to grip that with my bent chain nose pliers just at the point that we created that 12 o'clock upright. I'm going to hold that really firmly and push the short tail backwards. I'm going to do this in very small movements so you can see how that kind of comes together. So what we're doing is we're sealing that circular form to begin with. So once I've got that little bend in at the back there, I want to make that slightly sharper. So if I turn that over, you can see how I'm gripping that with those bent chain nose pliers. I want that to... Whoops-a-daisy. I would say it's because I'm hot, but it's not. It's because I am clumsy. I'm just holding the ring section, and I'm going to pull the short tail back. So what we're doing is we're creating a very sharp bend that goes around the upright section. What I'm going to do then, by hand, is draw the short tail around just a couple of times to get that sealed. Now, if you want to use 2 pairs of pliers for this section, you absolutely can. But I'm just going to show you that by hand, because we've warmed our wire, even though this is one of the firmer wires, you can still pinch firmly with your non-dominant hand, draw that tail around just a couple of times. So you can see we've got the wire itself creating the hoop shape, and then we've got those 2 wraps above it. So I'm going to designate that this is the face, and I'm going to trim the short tail away. I'm going to trim that just a little way past where that loop takes place. Again, I'm going to pinch very, very firmly, and then I'm just going to tidy that up so that the end of that short tail that we've just cut sits on the back of the design, and we can just give that a gentle squeeze to make sure it's nice and neat and tidy. So we've got our circular form and a long drop. So I'm just giving that a little bit of a smooth. Now, if you don't want to add beads, or you just want to add a single bead, absolutely not a problem at all. I'm going to pop them on in the same order as I did on the demonstration piece. So we've got a trumpet-shaped bead cap. Should probably be aware that having straight cuts and nice straight wire makes it much easier to get elongated beads on. However, one thing I will say is that the drill holes in these faceted, I want to say lozenge shape. I'm not 100% sure what we would call that. I'm sure somebody can correct me. And then I'm going to put the other trumpet-shaped bead cap into position. So you could have whatever beads you want on there, or no beads whatsoever. Entirely your choice. Thank you so much, Levita. That's beautiful feedback. I appreciate it. Anne says, Facebook is acting up. You keep fading in and out. Unfortunately, I am unsurprised, but here we are. You should be able to check back when the video is uploaded to Facebook after the event, so you can pause me and wait for Facebook to catch up. So what you can do is just slide those beads away, make sure that you're completely happy with how firm and tight this all sits down at the bottom, before sliding your beads down to be nice and snug. Now, if you're making this as an ornament, it doesn't matter what orientation your bail is at the top. If you're making this to be worn as a pendant, you will need to have a forwards bend up at the top of the long neck of the design. So I'm going to pop my bent chain nose pliers over the wire, keeping my hoop shape down at the bottom in the same orientation as the desk, and a piece of wire bending forwards at around about 90 degrees. Now you can see that there is a small gap up at the top, between the top of the last bead cap and where I've made the bend, and that is so that I have got space to add a few wraps on my wrapped loop. Now I can only endorse these articles strongly. Having a bail making set of pliers, these are the 6-stepped bail makers, is really handy because you've got all these beautiful round forms at just basically at hand. So if you want to make an oversized loop, let's flip that over. I'm going to use the number 6 size, which is the largest. I'm going to pop those into position, and what I'm going to do is rotate them away from me to create the first half of that circular form, and then I pop those back into position and draw that tail all the way around. I leave them on the pliers for just a second. It goes out of focus because I'm lifting them towards the camera, but you get that full hoop shape all the way around. So I want to retain the smooth roundness here. It's a very oversized loop. You can make whatever shape, size loop you fancy. So I'm now going to take that tail all the way around the core wire. Now I need to just be at pains to not bend this central neck. So I'm just going to do this very, very slowly in small manoeuvres, whilst concentrating on retaining that circular form, only supporting where single wire exists. We just need to check that we're still on the front of the design, take the wire round to the back, and then I'm going to trim that off with a tiny amount of spare. Just pop that in my scrap pot for later use. And then what I can do, you can see there's a sticky uppy bit. So what I need to do is take my bent chain nose pliers, any chain nose pliers will do as long as they've got a fine enough tip, and I'm just going to very, very gently, small movements at a time, get that to sit away neatly. So just tidy that until it's flat. This is the back, that's the front. So you can take a second if you need to just straighten up your bail up at the top, and we've now got our basic shape. I'm just going to pop over to the comments to make sure that we are still going out with you. Teresa says marquise shaped beads and bead cones for the metal. Yep, that is a bead cone. I like to think of them as trumpet caps. But, you know, there's probably a proper name for them, as Teresa is helping us with. Now, marquise has very specific dimensions, so although the bead itself has the marquise shape, a marquise will always be flatter. It will have a table facet, and then it will have a culet on the back, a culet if you prefer. So, I don't know what they are. They're beautiful. Love the facets. Stepped bail makers are an absolute wonder for your wire working. Megaphone bead caps, yep, that's very, very true. I love the pliers, says Anna, use them all the time for making my bells. Absolutely spot on and perfect. So the next thing we're going to do is add in some of our little zigzag sections to the centre of our design. So the first thing that I'm going to do is prepare the end of my zigzag segment. So what I need to do is make sure that that is cut exactly at either a peak or a trough. So Rosanna, much like myself, refers to these as mountains and valleys. And occasionally I accidentally slip into a really very poor Welsh accent when I say valleys. If I do that, I can only apologise. What we're looking to do is make sure that that is a very, very nice flat end, and it either takes place at a mountain or a valley, doesn't matter which. We're then going to pop in with our round nose pliers, and I'm just going to tuck. You see we've got halves, haven't we? We've got a half going up and a half going down. What I'm going to do is tuck the half going downwards in on itself by making that half of a segment turn into a very tiny loop. So in with the very tip of my pliers, my round nose pliers, and I'm just going to rotate that very small movements at a time, and I'm only using the downward slope on the mountain. So if I just give that a squeeze to make sure that it stays in 2 dimensions only, I'm just working as if I'm creating work between 2 panes of glass. So everything is flat, obviously apart from the beads. So giving that a bit of a squeeze. What we need to do now is start creating a circular form with our zigzag section. Now the zigzag tends to come out of the wire crinkler tool, and if you don't have one, absolutely grab one. They are so, so good, and they last forever. This is mine. I've had it about 9 years, I want to say, 9 or 10 years, something like that. So what I want to do is to start warming and not in the usual way. Normally when I warm wire, here's a small section of 0.8 or 20 gauge copper. I would run that between thumb and forefinger. If you do that with your zigzag wire, you stand the chance of just stretching it out slightly. So what I tend to do is just press lightly to just get a little bit of body heat into the metal that we're working with. Popping in, this looks beautiful so far, thank you so very much. Rosanna says, use my bail making pliers for all my wrap loops, makes them consistent. Absolutely. Zigzag wire is always, for me, 0.8 or 20 gauge. It works so perfectly with the machine. Now, I have zigzagged finer wire before. You can zigzag your 22 gauge quite nicely. When you start going lighter, say a 24 or 26 gauge, it's very pretty, it's really very easy to work, but you don't have enough strength in the finished article for it to not be a risk, unless you're working in wall art, which will see no action whatsoever. So I made a candle the other day. Let me just pop you up to the other camera. Made a candle the other day, and it's got all sorts of fancy wire writing and shapes on it. Now, that's actually in quite heavy duty wire because I'm used to working with wire. However, if you are going to do some wire writing or wire art, you could 100% use a much lighter gauge wire through the zigzag tool, the Wire Crinkler tool, because if you're going to stick it onto a candle or something or make it into a flat piece of art, it's not going to undergo the same stress and strains as our jewellery does. I don't know about you, but sometimes I go to sleep in my jewellery. If you had zigzagged wire that was 24 or 26 gauge and you went to sleep in it, it's not going to survive. It just isn't. So if you're using it for jewellery or for ornamentation that sees a little bit more action, definitely 20 gauge is the way to go. So we are back down to the board now. I have this section which is 20 gauge wire, and I've just put a little bit of residual warmth into it. And what I want to do is just start by moving that around little by little. And you can see what I'm not doing is harshly bending it. I'll show you on the other end. If you bend it, it comes out of shape really, really quickly. So let me just get rid of that bit that I've just completely horrified. And I'm going to start by moving this around very, very gently, a little bit like a cloud, until it starts to get to be the right size. Now, it is absolutely possible to use your pliers to make this happen much quicker. So what I'm doing here is the right hand, the downhill side, I'm using that to grip with my bent chain nose pliers, and you can see that this is curling up into the right size much more quickly. I would say do very, very small movements and make sure that you warm your wire first. You can, of course, just make this happen by hand. So what I need to do is make sure that that's going to fit inside the framework we have created. So you can see here my zigzagged wire is crossing over with the tidgy loop that we made. So what I want to do is cut off the wire at that point. Look twice, cut once, and then you don't have to cry. So I've just cut the little tail off the end that we don't need. And I've now got a section of wire here which I want to create a loop exactly the same as the first side. So I'm just going to open that out gently so you can see that a little bit better. Pop back in with those round nose pliers. If I grip the very end of the wire, and again I'm only using half. So this is an up stroke on this side, and I'm just turning that inwards on itself so that it can sit neatly inside the design. So if I just give that a squeeze like we did on the other end, just give that a squish and a squeeze, what we can then do is just make our little happy cloud shape. Reminded myself of Bob Ross, if only I had the talent. Let me just sit that down for a second and see if we have any questions going on. Zigzag Maker is available here at Jessie James Beads. It will be back in stock at some point in the very near future. Apparently, we just sold out last night, which is hopefully going to be rectified very, very soon. And I'm sure as soon as that does happen, we will give you an announcement to let you know. It's a very, very cool tool indeed. So to bring my zigzag section together with my circular frame, I like to use a 26 gauge. Now I'm going to cut off around about a foot. It's far more than I need, but it means that I can show you how to deal with an excess of wire. So what I tend to do is take a hold of the frame I'm wrapping to and the section of zigzag, and I will start somewhere in the middle of the zigzag section. I'm going to take my finer wire, again this is 26 gauge and I'm working with far more than I need. I've got around about a foot here, and I'm going to lay that over the top of the 6 o'clock position on my section that we're working at right now. And I'm going to take the right hand side, tuck the left hand side out of the way, take the right hand side and push it down the centre. And then I'm going to grip hold of that from underneath and draw it around underneath. The basis of what we're going to do, if you joined me last week when we added some zigzag wire to a different piece of jewellery, the technique is vaguely similar in that we are going to be wrapping around the lower part of the zigzag, the trough or the peak. You've got the peaks up here, the mountains, you've got the valleys, or you've got the troughs. Call them whatever you want to. The point is we're going to be wrapping the valley to the frame, and then we're going to take the tail of wire and push it just around the frame. So if I draw that all the way through, you can see it has this lovely, lazy, languorous, almost like a helix, just around the frame wire all by itself. If I bring that up slightly closer and then refocus my camera for a second, I'm going to try and do this next section up close so you can see exactly what's going on. So we have one wrap around both the zigzag and the frame. Then we've got a wrap just around the frame. My wire is always moving in the same direction. So I'm going to take the tail of the wire and push it down the centre of the whole design. We're wrapping together the frame and the zigzag, and we're using the trough or the valley of that zigzag segment. I'm then going to take the tail of the wire and push that in between the zigzag and the frame. You can draw that all the way through. And then we're having that lovely lazy helix around just the frame wire. Another technique is to push the leading edge of the wire. So this is very close to where the action is happening. I'm just going to push that down in the centre. So we're wrapping the frame and the zigzag, and then taking the tail and pushing that down inside the mountain, as it were, so that we have that lovely lazy wrap just around the frame wire. So you will just continue all the way to the end. So I'm just going to do this quite quickly now, but hopefully with it being that little bit closer, it will be totally visible to you. Take the tail all the way through, one wrap around the frame, and then one wrap around the frame and the zigzag. One wrap around the frame, so you can just grab that tail and pull it through. And then we need to just make sure that the form is sitting straight. Push the leading edge down if that's your preferred choice. And what we need to do with this is we need to keep the zigzag and the frame side by side. If one sits on top of the other, like so, it won't look quite as attractive. We want to keep the zigzag so that it's inside and parallel to that frame all the time. So I'm nearly to the end on one side, so I'm going to take the tail, push that down inside the mountain, allow that to lazily wrap around, and then when we get to the end, what we can do is take the tail, and it will go exactly the same as it has done on the previous manoeuvre, but this time, instead of just wrapping around the valley and the frame, it goes inside that handy little loop we made on the end. So we have like a stopping point. Pull that all the way through, and then I would wrap 3 times around the end to secure the design together. So that's 1, that's 2, and that is 3. Bearing in mind we have a front and a back on this design, I'm going to flip that over. What we will need to do is come in as close as we possibly can with those flush cutters. Give that a squish and a squeeze. Take the tail out of the way for now, and then tidy that end up. Now if I bring that back up to the camera again, just squish that end and rotate your pliers around in the same direction as the wire, and then it gets nice and tight and tidy and nothing should catch. I just need to drop this back down onto the board and refocus the camera so that we can see what we're looking at. Got to love a manual focus camera because it means it doesn't zig in and out all the time. They are on order, Jessie James Beads. Thank you so much. If your wire tends to kink on you, you can wrap it around your fingertip as it goes through. You absolutely can. So what you would do is exactly the same thing on the other side. My streamer's frozen. I hope everything is okay with you guys. Continue in the opposite direction until you've wrapped 3 times around the frame at the top. Troubleshooting. If you get up to the top and your 2 hoopy sections are crossing over, you can very, very simply cut just the tiniest amount of wire and make a new loop. It's almost better to start with slightly too much zigzag and have that possibility than to cut it too short. But at the end of the day, if you end up with your zigzag finishing a little bit further away, say that they started on equal and opposite sides at, let's turn it this way up, one starts at 11 and one starts at 1, it's not a problem. As my idea is that they try to be the same on both sides. So once this is all wrapped up, they should be vaguely similar. It should look pretty reasonable. So I'm going to pop this to one side because the technique for finishing on the left-hand side is exactly the same as the technique we just referred to on the right. All that you'll need to do is ensure that you're looking at the front when you finish off that last of the 3 wraps around the frame wire to make sure that you cut off just at the back. So I'm just going to take this over to one side for a moment. Now to attach our lovely little snowflake or whatever charm you decide to use in the centre, you can use a ready-made jump ring if you like. If you don't have a jump ring to hand, let's have a look at our stepped bail making pliers. These smallest 2 are really handy for a very quick, instant and temporary little jump ring. So I've got the scrap of the 18 gauge gold round wire that I was using earlier, and I'm just going to put a little bit of extra heat through that purely because I've used quite a lot of movement on this piece of wire earlier, so it's a little bit harder than I would have liked it to be. So just getting that nice and warm, I'm going to use the number 2 on my stepped bail makers, the second smallest rather. I'm just going to grip the very end of that wire and start rotating that around. Now what I want to show you is that the end of the wire needs to move above the tail of the wire as you start rotating around. So I'm just going to very, very carefully and gently, I'm not gripping over hard because I don't want to put too many tool marks in. At the end of the day, it's wonderful to have Jessie James's machined jump rings because they're really neatly saw cut and clean. But if you desperately need a jump ring in a pinch, you can make a quick one yourself. So what I'm going to do is trim away the very end to make sure that the cut at the end is flat with my flush cutters. Police your offcuts, please, so you don't end up standing on them in the middle of the night. Now we've got the flush cut on this side, so we want to get the flush cut on the other side when it comes around. So I just need to go in opposite and cut the next ring like so. So that's been mangled slightly because it's not right next to my nose, which is where I'd quite like it to be when I'm doing a precision manoeuvre. But what you can do in a pinch is make yourself a very quick to use jump ring. We'll just open and close that slightly so that that's a little bit rounder, and you can see that you have an emergency jump ring to use. So if you don't have one to hand and you need to get something made, you open it like a clamshell. If I show you with my hands, so you have your jump ring. You just open it like so rather than like so, and it will go back to the correct shape. So if we have a little snowflake in my angel wings pot, doesn't matter which side you use this charm up, it's absolutely stunning both ways. So I think I'm going to make this design with this side up. One of the beauties of having a professionally collected and curated bead mix like this one is that everything has been thought about. So again, with the sparkly snowflakes from the other choice of snowflake, you've got this gorgeous multi-tonal glitter on this side, but on this side it's equally beautiful. So I would wear these in earrings and be delighted with whichever side was showing. So what you can do if you need to is add your little snowflake or whatever your choice is to the top. Now I'm going to just move my loop around ever so slightly so that it's almost at the top. And I'm going to just pop in my emergency jump ring, pop that into position and then attach it to one of those loops. Now this is obviously quite tricky to do with a tiny emergency jump ring. So what I might do is put it onto a slightly different... No, it has gone through. That's all good. That's all good. The joy of live. So I'm just going to close that emergency jump ring up with my other chain nose pliers. If I can see to do that and get in there, just close that up, and then you've attached your snowflake to the design. You can obviously take a little bit more time to make that super neat and tidy, but that's the crux of this segment of the design. So what I want to do now is show you something else that you can do with these beautiful slim snowflakes that come in the mix. So if I pop this out of the way for the moment, I'm just going to check back in with you to see if we have any questions. We've got jump rings being shown in the comments. They are all amazing. I use the artistic wire jump rings all the time. So you've got some product there to look at, which is fantastic. Thank you very much, my lovely. So what I want to do is to make a little charm with this fabulous faceted puffy coin. Now, the thing that really attracts me to this bead mix, which is Holiday 2021 from Jessie James Bead's Winter Solstice. It's a beautiful blend. You have both very highly polished and you have matte buff facets. So you've got kite-faced facets going around what is essentially the upper surface of the bead. Your girdle is completely polished, which is beautiful. They are light. I know that these are crystal glass, but they are just so fancy. I love them. So we're going to make a little charm drop for this piece to begin with. Right, slide my snowflake up out of the way for a second. And I'm going to demonstrate this with round copper wire. This is 20 gauge, but you could just as equally use 18 gauge. I just fancied using a set of different gauges today because it does make it so much easier. It's very, very smooth and fluid to use with the 20 gauge. So I'm looking for my round nose pliers, which disappeared for a hot minute there. What I want to do is make a little double coil down at the bottom. So I'm going to warm my wire as always, grab the very end of that wire with the very tip of my round nose pliers and start rotating the end around. So if I just do very small movements, you'll see that you get a reasonably round shape. I'm going to switch now to any flat facing pair of pliers. These are my bent chain nose. Any chain nose or flat will do. And I'm going to take very small movements, and you can either rotate your pliers, you can rotate the wire, or you can have a combination of both of those. When you have as many turns around that coil centre as you fancy, I'm going to switch grip and I'm going to hold on to the coil with my non-dominant hand. I'm going to pop in with the tip of my bent chain nose pliers and pull the wire coil away. What I'm looking to achieve here is a reasonably nice straight offshoot coming up from that coil. So if I flip that over to the correct orientation, I've just slightly elevated that, so I'm going to flatten that down and give it a bit of a squeeze. You can of course take a little bit more time with your coils than I am today. Now I want this to be nice and sturdy. I've chosen to use a lighter wire. This is 18 gauge in the demonstration piece, and I'm showing you with 20 gauge. The beauty of 20 gauge is that it's a little bit lighter, it's a little bit smoother and more fluid to use. However, it is by its nature weaker. You can see that 18 gauge goes through this particular bead from the Winter Solstice mix very easily. So you can use whichever is your preference. If you want a slightly easier life, you can use the 20 gauge. I'm just going to get a little bit of work hardening, just about the distance I would expect that core wire to travel through the bead. I don't want to put too much work hardening any further north than that, because I will be wanting to do a little wrapped loop up at the top. So I'm just going to allow that bead to slide on before creating a wrapped loop up at the top. You could add other beads on top of this if you wanted a really long drop coming down. But I'm just going to show you now how to create a small wrapped loop. So in terms of orientation, I'm going to create a bar connector later. So I want to have my charm, I'm creating a charm for you now, with my 90-degree bend coming forwards. And in this way you can use this technique to create small pendants or earrings at any time. So I'm going a little bit further along my round nose pliers now. You could use your bail makers. If you don't have them, I go halfway with the pliers, pop the pliers back in, and then draw the wire around. That's just the technique that I use to get a nicely repeatable round form. It seems to work for me. You may find an alternative technique that works best for you. So again, you can see I left a small gap up at the top here. I'm going to just grip a hold of that circular form and bring the tail all the way around a couple of times. Now at the moment there is no front or back, so I'm just going to tidy up those loops, and wherever that wire ends, that's going to be designated the back of the design. So again, I'm using the flush side of my flush cutters, trim that away. Take the excess to one side, we'll be using it in a moment, and then use any fine tipped flat pliers like these chain nose pliers to just tidy that segment away. This is a key technique in wire working. Once you have mastered this, you can make earrings and pendants and charms with beads for the rest of forever. So that's your little technique there. You can see my loop is slightly to one side, so I just want to straighten that up. What we need to do now is show you a technique to just add on this little snowflake. Now I laid mine over the surface of the bead. When this is being worn, the movement is glorious, and can you see how having the shaping on this particular snowflake means that you get shards of light at different times. This is what we love about faceted gemstones. It's one of the reasons we're so attracted to sparkly coloured and diamonds as well. Sparkly coloured gemstones, diamonds, whatever it is that we're looking for. When you have facets like so, the light shoots off in different directions at different times. When you have something that is flat, you either get a blaze of light or you get all darkness. So I wanted to kind of replicate what the face of a diamond or a faceted gemstone will look like. So it's quite nice to work with. It's something a little bit different. What I'm doing is adding heat to the design. Now these are metallic snowflakes at their base. So I'm just adding a little bit of warmth before very, very gently just taking the outside away. And I'm not using any tools here. I'm purely using just my fingernail and the pad of my thumb just to bring a little bit of very, very gentle pressure, and in that way you can see now that light shoots off at different times. I'm just going to check back in with you to see if there are any questions at the moment. Fancy beads, said Jessie James. This is very, very true. They are fancy beads indeed. So what I need to do now is find a way to attach my fancy snowflake to the front of my faceted bead. Now you don't have to do that because the faceted bead is remarkable by itself. However, I can't remember what wire I used. I have a feeling it was 20 gauge, so we're just going to check that out to see if it will go through the loop on the end of the snowflake. So I'm going to smooth this offcut of 20 gauge round. I'm working with raw copper simply because I love it. Any colour wire is going to work with this collection. Silver looks amazing, but I've teamed copper with it and it seems to be quite happy too. So that's really, really nice and smooth now. If there are any rough ends, you might want to get rid of those. And what we're going to do is to create a very tiny loop indeed. Now because this weighs almost nothing, I put it on my gemstone scales and it was immeasurably small. It weighs almost nothing, so I'm going to show you an open loop now. So if I just scooch these things out of the way, I'm going to be quite close to the end of the pliers, not quite at the very, very end, and I'm going to create a circular form now. Just a circle, I'm not going to go any further than that. I will now be using my chain nose pliers, my bent chain nose pliers, just to grip inside that loop shape we've created. I'm going to pull the wire away at 90 degrees. So that's coming away at, as it were, the 12 o'clock position if this was the world's tiniest clock face. So once I've created that small loop down at the bottom, I'm going to squish that loop shape and it's going to be opened and closed just like a jump ring. So if I come to just about half of that loop and just open it forwards, exactly the same as you would a jump ring, and I'm going to pop in my loop at the top of that snowflake. Phew, it fits, thank goodness for that. I was worried that I'd used a 22 gauge and I was going to look an absolute idiot then, but no, all is well. So I'm going to close that little loop up exactly the same way as you would a jump ring, and I'm going to allow it to sit over the surface of that fancy, fancy bead. So you can see why I like doing this, because you get all those facet-like actions with a slightly mutilated snowflake. I do hope that Sarah will forgive me for altering this ever so slightly. So what we need to do now is add this onto the loop at the top of the charm. So very, very simply, I just need to measure how far up I need to have my next open and closable loop. Because these weigh next to nothing, an open and closable loop is pretty good, especially if you add a little bit of work hardening by squishing the wire. So if we look at the design, you can see that my open and closable loop at the top of the snowflake needs to be at 90 degrees to the first one. So this one is coming forwards. If I hold my pliers just above the nexus of that loop and take the wire off to one side, it's not quite 90 degrees, but nearly. So if I then rotate this around and pinch a hold, this might drop out because it's easier to do than it is to show. I'm then going to rotate the tail of wire around. That might be a little bit close to the camera, sorry. Take the tail all the way across and just show you we're doing exactly the same thing that we did earlier, but in 90 degrees opposition. So I then need to trim away the tail of the wire at the point where it crosses over the centre of the design. So if I take my cutters flush side to the loop, position them very, very carefully, look to make sure I'm not cutting anything I oughtn't, and then take away that tail. We'll probably use that for another design in a minute, I don't know yet. So before I go any further, I want to squash that loop down to make sure that it is a completely closed loop to begin with, and then I'm going to apply some work hardening to that loop. Now, open and closable loops have a multitude of uses. 9 times out of 10, I will want to make a wrapped loop because they are nice and secure. For something like this, we're not having enough space to make another wrapped loop, and it gets very fiddly adding them in. So an open and closable loop for something that weighs next to nothing it's going to work. So once I've work hardened my second loop, which is at 90 degrees opposition, I'm going to open it the same way. So if I take half of the loop and squeeze it up, we've got that open position. What I need to do then is to slide that onto the loop at the top of our fancy bead. So that sits into position, she says, and it immediately jumps back out because live. I'm going to grip a hold of the closable part and just draw that back down like so. So if I just hold on to that with my pliers for a second, you can see that that sits over the surface of that fancy faceted bead, but you have a whole load of movement. It will go to one side, you'll be able to see that matte buff versus high polish, and then it will just swing. These make perfect earrings as well, so that by itself is a lovely design. To add it onto the main frame, you can use either just a jump ring, as we did with the snowflake design in the centre, or you can create another small bar. I would go for a wrapped loop though, if it's going to be hanging down and moving around. But I have already showed you that, so I'm not going to repeat the same technique again. I just need to check in with you to see if there are any questions. Sarah says, that's so pretty. So are you, darling. Thank you very much. Geraldine says, will this live be available to view later on? After the live, what usually happens is that it will go into the videos segment of the Jessie James Beads Facebook page. So you should be able to view it without any Facebook assisted start and stopping. So that's the main components of our piece tonight. Let me just pop back up to here for a second. This necklace that I'm wearing tonight, some of you have already asked about, and I want to show you very, very quickly how you can create this technique. It's so easy. It's one technique, but repeated. Now, if you hop on over to my YouTube channel, there is a full tutorial showing you all of the ins and the outs. But as a special bonus for you now, I'm going to give you a quick guided tour. So if you like, I just need to take the one off that I'm wearing and pop it down on the board for you to have a look at. It's all made with Holiday 2021 Winter Solstice Bead Mix. So if I take those pieces out of the way for now, the technique I'm going to show you is called a suspended bead hanging. Now, I need to do that in 18 gauge wire. So I just need to find where I've put it. I'm going to cut off let's say about 3.5 inches. You do need to ensure, if you're working with a firmer temper wire, as I am now, this was created in raw copper, which is super soft and squishy. This is a much firmer temper wire that I'm working with in hand. I'm just going to get that as smooth and as fluid as I possibly can, like so. I'm going to pop back in with my multi-step bail makers in a second as well. They are super useful. Let's pick a bead. Let's pick a bead from the bead box. I adore these purple ones. These almost miracle-like beads are fabulous too. But let's go for... here it is. That's the one I wanted to use. Flat disc beads sit so perfectly in this design, which is why I chose this oversized bead from the Winter Solstice mix as the focal. Round beads that are slightly smaller also work. I've got spacers up here, all from the mix we're looking at right now. So let's just pop this over to one side. It's a super cool and easy technique. So I have, as I say, around about 3.5, I want to say, inches of wire. And it's nice and smooth and warm. So if you have bail making pliers that are around about the same size as your bead, it's perfect. These are slightly larger, I think, the beads rather. So I've found the centre of my wire and I'm just wrapping that lazily around. If you find that your bail makers aren't quite large enough, use a pencil or a pen or the smaller edges of your mandrel. So I'm just going to open that out slightly, but I've still got that lovely U shape, and we just need to see if the bead's going to sit inside. It isn't, so I'm just going to open that out and then reform by hand. Now, if you warm your wire, you absolutely can get away with shenanigans like this. If you don't warm the wire, it will be tetchy and it won't love it very much. So there you go. The bead will fit in the little U shape that we've created down at the bottom there. So what I want to do is just make my life easier and open out the two top wires for now. And I'll show you what to do with them in a hot second. So I'm then going to grab a hold of some of the 26 gauge, and this is round gold. And you do only need ever such a tiny amount. I've just found a scrap in the scrap pot actually, which is handy. Tiny amount of wire. Take your bead back out of the U form. Lay a good inch over one side. The finer gauge wire is going over the top of both halves of the U. And what we're going to do is wrap this about 6 or 7 times around the one side. And once I've wrapped it, I'm going to show that to you again a little bit more closely. So that's a really, really messy, lazy spiral. So I need to tighten that up. And then what we'll do is we'll give that a really nice squish in a minute to make sure that it's nice and neat and tidy. So I think I've gone for around about 8 turns on there. I would say you do need a good 6 turns of wire, and make it the same number on the first side and the second side. So I actually can't see how many that is, so we'll be eyeballing it for today, but you need to count. So we have our U shape into which we know our bead will fit, and the wire is sitting over the front of both of those sides. Can you see there's a sticky uppy bit on my wire there? Felt that with my thumb, so we're just going to chase that away, get that nice and neat and tidy. Because when the bead is sitting into position, you may not have access to do that. So allow the bead to slide on like a little zip line. There's the hole, there it is. Swoosh, so that it sits into the lower section. It doesn't have to sit all the way down to the bottom if you don't want to. That's an aesthetic value that you can play around with. What we do want to happen is for the finer gauge wire to sit at the same height from the bottom on the left as it does on the right. What I'm going to do is invert the whole thing now. I'm right dominant, so I find it easier. I'm going to flip that over. So we're looking at the back, which means the finer gauge wire is underneath and wrapping around. So on the second side it's much easier. So 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns, and can you see how I'm winding in the same direction all the time? And as I go, I'm pushing that wire down. This is why I can't have nice nails. That's 4 wraps, tighten up. We're going to give that a 5, tighten it up. 6, tighten it up. 7, that looks pretty good. Let's just tail it off there and say that I counted. Can we all pretend that I counted? Cut once after looking twice. Tidy that tiny little sticky uppy bit of wire away, like so. So you've got the first part of your bead hanger. So you can see that these are different sizes and different drops. My focal is quite rotund compared to the others, which means that I have the opportunity to just draw these two wires gently together. Now, if you've pre-warmed your wire, they will just go like that. It's almost like magic. I'm just going to straighten those up slightly. And at this point I want to decide how far from the bar, we've got a bar running up the centre, I want this to drop. So let's say I wanted it to be the centre focal and I want it to drop quite a long way. I need to go about, gosh, I don't know what it is in inches, it's about 5 millimetres. I'll show you once I've cut it. I just need to cut away the excess wire at the top. If I lay that over the top of what we're going to use as our imaginary bar, I'm not going to use that because it's very, very flippy floppy wire and it won't work. It's there to show you that we need to have an excess over the top of where we want our wire to hang. We're then going to pop back in with the round nose pliers. I'm going to support the bead frame we've created and just roll the wire around, and you can do that in as many manoeuvres as it takes. So that's just taken 3 manoeuvres for me to make a loop. I then want to do the same on the other side, but the loop needs to be on the same orientation. So you can see the loop is coming towards me, so I need to rotate in the opposite way to how I just did it a second ago, which is good because it gives you the opportunity to see that a bit more closely. So you can see we have 2 loops sitting away, and those will be on the rear of the design. So if I thread that onto the bar to begin with, you can see what that looks like. That's the crux of the technique. I'm just going to pinch another bead from my bead mix to show you how to add in a spacer. So picked at random, doesn't have to be a spacer that is like a, oh gosh, what's that? That's like a rondelle really. But if you slide your bead back to the centre, back to the end rather, and just allow one of those hooks to come off, what we're going to do is add in a bead to sit between the 2 hooks at the top. Can you see how I've slid that up? It's not yet on the wire, but it's sitting next to that spacer bead. If I take that all the way to the end and then hook that final bead over the top, so you can see where that's coming out now. And it's a suspended bead bar necklace. And you would then add your spacers on either side, however you want to do it, however many or however few. When you get to the end, you go for a wrapped loop. I've popped just a very simple wrapped loop and some chain on this one because the beads speak for themselves. So that is a number of techniques for you today. If I just pop everything back into view for a moment that we've looked at. Here we go. Sit that back down so you can just take a closer look. I'll take some photos later and send them in so that they can be added for you. But that's a couple of techniques from today's beautiful, beautiful bead mix, which is Holiday 2021 Winter Solstice. Let me just grab my snowflake so that that sits there for a hot second. I hope that you've enjoyed today's live here on Facebook for Jessie James Beads with the Winter Solstice bead mix. I adore this bead mix. I'm just going to pop back and see if there are any questions. Trudy says you always give clear instruction. Thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback. That's beautiful. Necklace is gorgeous. Thank you, Geraldine. I appreciate that too. It's one that I might actually just have to keep for myself. I have a question that has nothing to do with today's video. How did you attach the cabochon dragon eye to the spike weave? Can't remember. You'll have to send me a photo of which design you are thinking of so that I can have a look. It's probably just suspended front and back between sections of weaving, but if you inbox me a photograph of the design you're talking about, I can probably talk you through it. Geraldine says, got it. Replying to Sarah, I think, love these 2 items. Thank you. Thank you for watching. Thank you, says Sue. Thank you for being here. Deb says thanks. Janine sends me a beautiful emoji with hearts for eyes, and I love that one. Thank you. Beautiful creations. Love the drop for the necklace. Thank you. I'm not Meredith, I'm Jem, but I love Meredith, so I'm going to take it as a compliment. Sarah, thank you, my love. I will see those of you who are at, I was going to call it winter camp then. You know what I mean if I say that. Those of you who are joining us at winter camp, I'll see you tomorrow. Other than that, I should be back next week with some incredible copper beads, if they let me come back and play again. Take care. It's been my pleasure to be with you. I'm Jem for Jessie James Beads. Bye for now.